Hello, everyone, and welcome to PAC's Advocacy and Action series, where we break down the strategies and best practices that help organizations build effective and impactful political affairs programs. I'm your host for today, Liz Bird, and today I'm here with Kelly Knowles. Kelly, I know you've been a guest on this series before. We're excited to have you back, but do you want to take a second to reintroduce yourself?
Yes, thanks, Liz. Thank you so much for having me back on Advocacy in Action. I'm excited about our conversation today. And I serve as the political advisor at PAC to assist PAC members with political engagement, projects, and questions. And in that role, I also staff our Action Fund, which is PAC's political action committee that works to elect pro-business, solutions-oriented candidates to Congress. And so I'm just thrilled to be here with you today and happy to talk about a very interesting topic in the political engagement world, raising money.
Yes, we're excited to have you here. And today's episode is titled The Pre-Ask Playbook, so starting your PAC strategy right. Now, what does that mean? Well, Kelly and I are going to be talking about how to set up your PAC for success, like Kelly mentioned, before ever making that first ask. So this can be things from building the right strategy to engaging supporters effectively. So this episode, not to spoil it, is going to be packed with practical insights to help both new and experienced PAC leaders start smart, stay focused, and we're going to make every ask count. So, Kelly, unless you have anything else to add, I've got a lot of good questions for you, so we can jump right in.
I can't wait. Let's dive in. Very
All
good.
right. So, Kelly, when you're building a PAC solicitation strategy, what are the first three things that you're considering before you even start thinking about that ask?
Right. Well, the most important thing when you are planning your PAC strategy and how to raise money, obviously, right, is to know your audience. I mean, that's very true in sales. And let's face it, we're in the sales business of trying to push our PACs forward and raise money. And I think, really understanding who your audience is, both in a corporate and a trade association setting, right? We have corporate PACs and corporations who are members of BIPAC, and then also associations, mostly trade associations and membership associations. And so understanding, who makes up that membership base, who are our eligibles, right? Who are we even allowed to ask money from? So there are federal regulations that obviously guide our PACs on how we have to run our business. And so we have to understand who is eligible for a contribution, to make a contribution, and who are we going after and targeting in terms of trying to bring them into the political action committee. And so really on both the corporate and the trade association side, you want to segment your audience by what role do they play within the company and your membership base, what has been their engagement history in the past, who is an opportunity for a first-time contributor, who has been a loyal contributor, and you have to approach those groups in some ways the same and then in some ways differently. And then last, what is their giving capacity? We have guidelines that we use at BIPAC. We've used the terms 0.5% of annual salary as a way to think about political contributions and giving. And then at the very senior level, maybe going up to 1%. And so you really have to understand who your audience is, and therefore kind of making what's the best approach in terms of making the ask. So that's probably the number one thing when you think about your PAC strategy. Who is my audience? But really above all of that, and a bigger picture, and I've used this so many times. This was something Stephen Billett, who runs the graduate, or used to run the Graduate School of Political Management at George Washington University, where I went to grad school. And he used to always say, and I think it's so smart, and I credit him, I say it a lot, it takes money to run a business, and it takes money to win a campaign. And I think sometimes there's so many negative connotations around money in politics. And I think to try to mitigate some of those negative perceptions, we need to really get to basics and connect with business folks, because that's who we're raising money from, and say, you need resources to run your business. You've got to hire people. You've got to have headquarters. You've got to, maybe you're producing a product, you're selling a service. You need marketing, communications. You need all those things in order to run a business. And the same applies to winning a campaign. You need people, you need boots on the ground, you need marketing and communications, you need a campaign headquarters, you need strategy, polling, on and on, right? So if you think about using your PAC dollars to support a champion member of Congress or a promising candidate, you're making that political contribution to support the success of their campaign. And so when you tie it back to the business world in the same way, I think that can really resonate. And one of the other things I always tell folks when raising PAC money is you have to make sure that your audience understands two very important things. And if they don't, you're not doing your job. They need to understand, number one, why do we need a PAC?
Mhm.
Why do we need a PAC as a organization, as a company, as a trade association, industry trade? And number two, why do we need a PAC and how are we going to use the PAC? And so why and how, constantly ask yourself, and we'll talk about that maybe later in the conversation about when we get more strategic about the ask. But those two basic things, it takes money to run a business, takes money to win a campaign, and then making sure you nail the why and the how. And then thirdly, and under this question, I wrote down, obviously you've got to get your ducks in a row in terms of compliance and training and timing. And so you've got to make sure that, your legal and regulatory requirements are clear. We're governed by the Federal Election Commission, the FEC, and you've got to make sure from another standpoint in terms of timing that you're aligning any kind of solicitation campaign, with your organizational calendar, right? So think about that from what's going on at your company or your trade association. You want to avoid incredibly busy seasons and major events. So just take the calendar into a purpose. So I would just say, in summary, when you think about building a PAC strategy, you need to cover three areas: your audience analysis, which I talked about, what is the value proposition of your PAC, and then compliance and timing.
Yeah, it sounds like having that strong foundation is key, and then that will lead to success behind your ask. So that's very
Right. All those
helpful.
things, through all those things, launch your campaign.
Yes. So I guess beyond just setting our target, how do you define success for a PAC solicitation campaign?
Well, one of the things I've always loved about political engagement in my career and being responsible for PACs, directing a PAC early on in my career and advising on them later on in my career, one of the things I've always been really focused on is just how easy it is to measure success, right? And so oftentimes in government relations and lobbying and the work we do, it's very difficult to measure success because a lot of the time, very effective lobbyists stop things from happening. They get just a phrase struck from a bill. They form a really close relationship with a member of Congress that you use down the road. And those are things that are hard to quantify in terms of, really metrics and goal setting, right? But with the PAC, fundraising, first and foremost, did you hit your goal? And remember, oftentimes we set goals in 2-year election cycles. That's how we measure the size of a PAC. They're a $250,000 a cycle PAC, right? We use those kinds of words. But I think it's important to set short and long-term goals for the PAC, most certainly. But just aside from even basic numbers and fundraising, there's so many other metrics that you really need to focus on and be able to carry the message that, hey, back to your senior leaders, that we've made great strides in the PAC. And so I made a few notes. I would say kind of there's 4 areas. The first one is just participation rates, right? Like maybe you didn't hit your fundraising goal, but if you look at the percentage of all the eligibles, the folks who were eligible to contribute to your PAC, what percentage of those folks actually made a contribution? So just a participation rate. So that's an important thing to look at when you're trying to analyze how successful was the engagement of our PAC. So participation rate. Number 2, retention. How many repeat customers do you have with your PAC? Who are loyal contributors? And who increased their contribution from last year to this year. Those are all measures of success, right? Who are first-time contributors. So you've got loyal contributors, repeat customers, first-time contributors, who increased, and what percentage of increase. You can really drill down into the metrics and come up with a great report for your senior leadership to kind of demonstrate the success of your solicitation campaign. And then also it's super important to measure the diversity of your donors. At trade associations and corporations, you've got folks giving who may be chairman of the board of their companies, all the way down to, senior directors, and that level. And so do you have a broad swath of engagement across the board from the very highest leaders down to entry-level folks who are eligible to give to the PAC. I think that's super important. A lot of times with trade associations, you have a board that's full of very top leaders, and they give in a big way, but are you really drilling down into those next levels and capturing smaller donations that take a different approach, but are very meaningful if you're looking at metrics like participation rate and engagement? And then one of the other ways to measure, which I think is harder to do, probably of this list of four, this is the hardest one, but it's important, and that's how engaged are your donors and contributors? Are they more informed and involved in your advocacy efforts? I mean, do you feel like the education and the outreach you've done on the PAC has converted folks into being key volunteers in your advocacy effort? Are they hungry for more information? Do they respond to emails? Do they call you when an issue comes up? I mean, those things, that's a little bit more hard to quantify than an actual metric, but it's a good sign that you've run a campaign that has resonated with folks, and you're building those relationships that as you move forward, you'll continue to strengthen that success.
No, I love that. And I love that last point. I mean, as we're closing out the year, it's those things where the big numbers are what everyone likes to see and it explains your ROI, but those other stories, like that's where you really show the impact that you've made
That's right. That's
for
right.
your employees and stakeholders. So I love that. I guess I don't know about you, but this year I've heard a lot about personalization. So I wanted to ask, how do you balance the need for that consistent messaging with the need for personalization in your outreach?
I think that's really one of the most challenging things in today's environment. I
Mhm.
am constantly trying to figure out what is the best way to reach contributors. And I hear this phrase a lot about meet people where they are. And I think, what does that really mean? I don't really
Yeah.
know sometimes. It's a real big catchphrase lately that I hear all the time. And
Mhm.
so I think I've always been a big believer in one-to-one messaging, and that personal outreach is key. It is critical to be a successful fundraiser and run a successful campaign. I would say that, you need core messaging
Mhm.
regardless of how personal you get. So back to that why and how. So again, if you your goal should be anyone who contributes to your corporate or association PAC, if they're asked, why do we have a PAC and what do we do with it? They need to be able to answer that question.
Yeah.
They need to be able to outline that. And so you have to be able to outline that and then communicate and teach them. Why do we need a PAC? We need a PAC for these reasons. We need to establish strong relationships with key members of Congress and promising candidates who will support our mission critical issues, be go-to folks on the Hill as we push our policy agenda and goals for our company and our association and our industry. It takes money to run a business. It takes money to win a campaign. We need to raise these funds so that we can then support these members in their efforts to win re-election, so that the right people will be in Washington when we're carrying our message, our company's message, and our industry's message up on the Hill. So you need to be just over the top repeating that. I often times say you have to say something 5 times before it really resonates
Yes.
with an audience. I had a former CEO who used to say, we got to Johnny 5 times them. We've got to say it over and over again. And that is really true, particularly in today's environment of information overload, right? And so core messaging is so important. So it has to be constant across all channels, whether you're, doing a mass mailing or just picking up the phone and making a one-to-one. But I would also say, messaging needs to be tailored, again, back to knowing your audience. So what has been their past role in giving? What are they interested in? A particular department in a company that you're after for support may care about a certain set of regulations or legislation you're working to address than maybe another department will care about. And so think about, how that message is hitting. That core message needs to go to everyone, but then think about your audience and how you need to specialize that message based on who you're trying to push into action. And I think, for awareness purposes and just general education, mass communication is okay. I mean, we got to do those digital emails, and I'm wondering how quickly, or how much hard copy actual in the mail is going to come back around. I mean, I can't really tell. We get so much digitally
Mm-hmm.
and electronically. Is a hard copy thing going to make a resurgence? I'm not really sure about that, but you've got to do your own testing based on who your audience is and understand what they like and how they like to receive that type of information. So, one of the things we haven't even touched on that's super important is to think about, have you surveyed your employees and your association members about, number one, how do they like to receive information, but also what is their knowledge base on about the PAC and your political engagement programming, and what do they want to learn more about, and what are they interested in? So, mass communication with those core messages, but then there is nothing that tops that personal outreach, that one-to-one dialing for dollars, making a phone call, a personalized email, a personalized note card. Those things really go a long way in a day and age where we're just bombarded with huge distribution lists and inboxes that are overflowing. So that's how
Yes.
I would diversify your communications.
Yeah, that consistency is building that credibility, but like you said, that personalization, like people remember how you made them feel, and a mass email
Right.
doesn't make you feel that great, but a thank you note, handwritten and signed with something, it does. So
Right.
I love that you mentioned that. I guess I'd be interested in strategies that PACs use to keep supporters motivated without overwhelming them. As you and I both know, and you mentioned there's a lot of noise out there, but how do you maintain momentum and engagement throughout the solicitation period, especially when facing potential donor fatigue?
Well, donor fatigue is a very difficult thing to manage. And like we talked about in the previous question, there's just so much information and getting folks' attention, and that is a very hard needle to thread. I mean, how do you keep folks informed without, abusing the opportunity to get their attention, right? And so again, you've got to know your audience, you've got to survey the audience. Um, this is probably the most difficult thing. And I think it's important to remember you're not going to make everybody happy. I mean, there's always going to be somebody to say, I never hear from you, or someone who says, all you do is email me. Or I will say one of the things that I have really pushed over the years when coaching about how to raise money and forming relationships, cultivating contributors, it is so important to not make them sad to see you coming. And I had another mentor over the years who explained that to me. And basically, if you're always asking for money,
Yeah.
anytime someone hears from you, you're going to make them sad to see you coming. They're going to look at you and say, oh no, here she comes. Here he comes. This is going to cost me. Right. And you don't want that, your name to show up in an inbox, or you see someone at a corporate meeting or an association function and they
Mhm.
literally run in the opposite direction because they know that they're about
Yeah.
to be asked for money. And that really happens. You have
Yeah.
to be so mindful of that as a fundraiser, and if you work in the political engagement space. And so I think I've always said for every 3 communications that you have with someone, one should be just a straight up hard ask, right?
Mhm.
So don't make it more than, a third of your outreach. It's so important to communicate with contributors when you're not asking for money. Are you supplying them with the latest political news? Are you letting them know how you're utilizing the PAC money that they've contributed? Um, you know, really showing them, hey, here's a member of Congress who started out as a candidate, and we got on board with them early, supported them in their race. They got to Congress. We hosted a meet and greet for them, which Liz, you and I talked about this summer about how to cultivate
Yes.
new members of Congress. We did that. They're in Congress now. They sit on this committee. We've done these fundraisers for them. We've formed this really close relationship, and there was just this critical vote for our industry, that we won, and it meant this for our bottom line. And really, just outline for folks without asking for more money. I mean,
Yeah.
every time they hear from you, they don't need to be asked for money. So I think that's certainly a big way to build credibility and trust with your contributors, is to really be mindful that every dollar counts. We've got a lot of challenges economically right now. Folks are under pressure, and it's totally fine to ask for money and feel confident in it, but don't abuse it and don't make it the only time you ever have an interaction with your audience.
Yeah. No, I love that. And it's almost like how you mentioned sales is like a role you have to take on. It's also like you also have to take that communicator role where you're telling that story, you're adding some transparency, you're doing all the things that make people see the benefits and back to that foundation, like you said. So that's a great way to
That's
tie it
right.
all together. I guess if you could give one piece of advice to someone looking to level up their PAC solicitation or their program, what would that be?
Well, I've
The
thought about
hardest
that.
question I'm going to ask you today,
Yeah,
right?
no. Well, and it's so relative, right? Like, what
Yeah.
is the situation of your pack? So I
Yeah.
think that answer might be a little bit different
Hmm.
depending on what situation the pack is in, how successful you've been, and what kind of campaigns you've run in the past. But I will say one of the things that I find that is the most um, effective way to raise money for the PAC. It's really kind of two areas. And the first one, you just touched on it when you summarized the answer to my question, which is storytelling. Um, we have study after study that shows telling a story captivates people's attention and personalizing that story as much as you can. And so I've done this in board presentations. I've told personal stories to try to get folks' interest. I've featured personal stories of others, whether it's a contributor, a board member, a member of Congress. I mean, people love to hear a good story. I'm from the South, and I love a good story
Yeah.
and grew up listening to them. So I think incorporating as many stories as you can into your pitch is super important. And of course, that can come a lot of the times in the form of a testimonial. And so your champions, your PAC champions who have been longtime contributors, your first time contributors, hearing the story of what made them decide to contribute for the first time can be very effective. And with today's technology and the support and help of BIPAC for members, we can help them tell their story, right, with some of the resources that we offer to members. And so I think really always thinking about storytelling in all forms, whether it's an email that could be from a senior member of the team that's reaching out to ask and tell their own story, a video of a member of Congress who talks about, the importance of corporate and association PACs and the relationships that the member of Congress has formed with that industry because of the support from the PAC. It just goes on and on. And so I think incorporating storytelling, that why and that how, into that story is just so important to stay laser focused on that. And then I would say it's harder to execute in some realms, but the peer-to-peer solicitations and engagement, and we have some members at BIPAC who have done this incredibly effectively. And Liz, I think we've featured some of them on webinars, some of the different companies and associations who have run outstanding peer-to-peer campaigns, where essentially as a PAC director or a political engagement staff, you're literally training your corporate employees and then also your association members on how to make the ask themselves and raise money really for you. And so peer to peer can really go a long way in terms of making the ask and converting. I think especially first time contributors are most often moved if they hear from a peer. And so storytelling and peer to peer outreach is just incredibly important. It would probably be the two things I would say. Um, if you really want to level up your pack, take a hard look at those two areas and see where you can really lean into that.
No, I love that. That's great advice. I don't think we can top that. So we can go ahead and wrap up our episode here. I have lots of great notes. And Kelly, as always, it's great getting to just take some time and connect with you. And for everyone listening, if you like this episode, be sure to subscribe, share with your networks, check out our other library of episodes. Kelly and I have one together. And you can even consider sponsoring us for more conversations like this one. So thank you.
Thanks, Liz. It was great to see you. Thanks again.
Thank you.